I'm John Palchicchio, Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, and welcome to this week's Recovery Weekly Check-In with DMPED. Excited to be joined this week by several of our housing agency partners to talk about a topic that is top of mind with it being the first of the month, and that is rental assistance. So just yesterday, Mayor Bowser announced the Housing Stabilization Grants, which are an opportunity for housing providers, both in our affordable housing portfolio as well as small housing providers, to apply for assistance for their properties that would also be passed along to their renters. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And I have with me a couple of guests that have talked about rental assistance and have done it throughout the pandemic because we know that rental assistance is top of mind for folks. I have Polly Donaldson, the Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development, Laura Zeilinger, the Department of Human Services, and Chris Donald, the Director of the DC Housing Finance Agency. All will talk about housing rental assistance and what we're doing to help people get through the pandemic. As you know, that we have rental assistance programs that have been open, but we want to get more attention to them. And this new approach that I talked about, the housing stabilization grants, is one that we're going to talk about today, as well as the ability for housing providers to access some of our other programs as well in the coming weeks. So with that, I want to turn it over to Polly Donaldson, the Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development. And while she talks, I'm going to figure out how to get this mask to stick. Polly, with that?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Appreciate it. Glad everyone could join us today. I want to walk you through our rent relief programs and resources that we have. I want you to very much, though, keep in mind that we know the need is great. That the rents are essential to maintaining our housing stock. That's what enables our affordable housing to stay affordable, and what enables our small landlords to be able to continue to offer affordable housing and housing throughout the 8 wards of the district. So we want to be able to provide financial relief to tenants who are unable to pay their rent, and we want to preserve our stock of affordable housing, and that's the point of today's Housing Provider Rent Assistance Program. Well, but first I want to share that we actually surveyed housing providers in the Housing Stabilization Grants. Next slide, please. And that we did that because we really wanted to know what the actual impact was of the pandemic on rental housing. And here's some of what we found as we asked them about their business model, about their tenants, and about the expectations they had for the future. Of the survey respondents who had a mortgage on their property, 34% said they had difficulty paying that mortgage in October. And despite many efforts that we have made, and we've certainly been here before at the check-in to talk about our emergency rental assistance programs, most housing providers who participated in the survey were unaware of the many district programs and protections that have been passed as part of the pandemic response. And so no program was familiar to more than half of the respondents. And furthermore, rent assistance for residents who have been impacted economically by COVID-19 was the #1 policy proposal suggested by housing providers in the survey. And so we heard you. We heard that. We also heard small landlords as an essential part of our housing market needing help and assistance. So what have we done? Next slide, please. Have put together $10 million of CARES Act funding to cover up to $2,000 per month since from April, when the pandemic really hit the hardest in terms of impact. The program will pay 80% of the delinquent rent if and only the housing provider agrees to waive the remaining 20% and any unpaid fees. And so this really becomes the way to help both providers and credit tenants for rent owed to help them stay stably housed. Next slide, please. So who can apply? This program is the first that's allowing applications for housing providers to apply on behalf of their tenants. but in two very specific subgroups, which we want to make sure we are protecting first. And that are housing providers with properties that are either in the DHCD portfolio, meaning they received Housing Production Trust Fund dollars or other federal or local subsidies, or are in the Housing Finance Agency portfolio, particularly those that have been participants in the low-income housing tax credit program. And we also very much want to help the small landlords. So these are housing providers with 20 or fewer total rental units that are not in the other portfolio of affordable housing. And this is for many, really, we've heard from small landlords of their needs and the needs to keep, and we want those units to be maintained as part of our housing stock as well. So next slide, the timeline. Applications open today. The application is live on the coronavirus.dc.gov/rent. On that website, the application for the small landlords is live, and information on how to access the Housing Finance Agency implementing the for the larger portfolio of affordable housing projects. Links to their website are there as well. There will be $9 million for rents in the affordable housing portfolio, $1 million for small landlords. And again, because this is funded by the state and local dollars in the CARES Act, it must be expended by December 31st of this year. So we have prioritized this program, these dollars for this month. The application period will be from December 1st and will close on Friday, December 11th. And we will be assessing on a rolling basis. And so I do encourage you to check out the websites, gather the necessary documents and materials, and also determine your eligibility for which program and to be able to respond. Next slide, please. So just so I want to reiterate, we also have existing rent assistance programs that your tenants can apply for. If you're a housing provider, we're having a tenant and you're not in the portfolio and you're not a small landlord, there still are the CHAP, the Coronavirus Housing Assistance Program, and the slide gives you the information here. It's a $6.2 million program funded by Community Development Block Grants. That money does not expire on December 31st, but will continue into the new year. And actually in January, we are going to supplement it with a CHAP program for housing providers. And so we're going to add an additional $4 million in January to support that effort as well. So I also know that we're going to hear from Director Zeiwiner, and she'll talk about the ERAP, the Emergency Rent Assistance Program that the Department of Human Services runs. We're coordinating very closely with our two agencies because we're using many of the same community organizations to implement the programs, and we want to make sure that we're coordinated and maximizing the resources in the community. So, Deputy Mayor, I'm going to turn it back to you. I thank you very much, and I'll be happy for the conversation that we'll have later. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
So I know we presented a lot of information just in those first few minutes. We have folks who are watching on Channel 16, folks who are watching on live streams on Twitter, Facebook. If you have questions, you can use the hashtag DC Hope. That'll help us see it on Facebook or on Twitter. If you're on the phone line, you can press 0 now, and that will get you into the queue to ask a question or join the conversation. And next up, we have the Director of the Department of Human Services. As Polly mentioned, Laura runs the ERAP program, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and it is a program that has been in place before the pandemic, but we wanted to bring attention to it again today. So Laura, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it and appreciate the opportunity to be here and share information about the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, often referred to as ERAP. And I think shortly you'll see the slides about the program up on the screen. And I'm going to start with an overview. So ERAP is available for residents who need help with their housing assistance with their rent because they have overdue rent or rent arrears because of difficulty paying rent. And it can help with past rent as well as with rehousing assistance for people who have lost their housing and need support with first month's rent and security deposit to regain housing in an emergency. Applicants are eligible for ERAP once they owe rent more than 30 days past due, and based on their income. There's a slide that will shortly be up, I hope, to show what is the income threshold for ERAP based on the size of the household. It is based on the area median income. It's a HUD guideline. It's also available on the HUD website and on the DHS website. So residents who are at 40%, and you can move forward a couple of slides, at 40% of the area median income are eligible for ERAP. And again, it can be used for rent arrears. It cannot be used for utilities, mortgage, or other housing expenses, but it can help with back rent, first month's rent, security deposit based on income and owing past rent. Next slide, please. So the way that residents can both determine whether or not they may be eligible for ERAP or learn more about the program is through the DHS website. The link is going to show up shortly on your screen. It is at dhs.dc.gov, and on the ERAP page. And there is a self-assessment where one can determine there whether or not they are likely to qualify for ERAP. And if so, you can make an appointment with one of the community organizations with whom we partner on the website. Then they will reach back in contact with an appointment and to confirm that. The second way a resident can access support with ERAP is by directly calling one of our community providers to schedule an appointment. Because of the anticipated large volume during the public health emergency, we find that the website is the easiest way to arrange an appointment, and we encourage people to put in their application through the website. And if you do not see an appointment right away, to check back in a couple of days. We get a lot of duplicate records and then need to clean those up in order to clear available appointments. And we hope to be able to solve that issue more expeditiously, but really through the website portal would be a great way for residents to know whether they qualify and to begin that application process. On the next slide, I wanted to help folks understand that resources are available, that oftentimes people wait until they are at risk of eviction because they've received a writ before they apply for ERAP, but we want to encourage people to apply if they've been having trouble and paying their rent and owe rent arrears now. So we have $14 million that are right now appropriated to help residents who qualify for ERAP. And so far, we have dispersed just over $312,000 this year. And so really want to encourage people who are having difficulty to put in that application and to go ahead and get help with their rent. And we've been supporting residents with this program for many years, and particularly since the beginning of the public health emergency. On the next slide, I wanted to also call attention to some recent changes to the ERAP program in the public health emergency. There is council legislation and regulations that the Department of Human Services issued that makes some new changes. One relates to the income threshold by which people qualify. That is at 40% of the area median income, that we went over what that looks like. But also it raises the rent assistance cap. So whereas before there was a cap that was a fixed cap of $4,250, with which we could, was a maximum with which we could help residents, now that amount is based on HUD's rent reasonableness guidelines and based on the zip code and size of the apartment, and we can help with up to 5 months worth of rent. The other really important change we want people to be aware of is that households can apply twice in a calendar year. It used to be that we could only accept one application from a household within 12 months, and recent changes allow us to support a household twice, which means that folks should not wait until they are facing eviction to apply, they should, because they can apply again if they still need help with rent a second time within the year. So those are some important developments and information about the program. As Director Donaldson said on the next slide, we are working closely in coordination to really make the residents' experience applying for assistance as seamless as possible, meaning that we will be working to combine and have one singular application for rent assistance and to have a singular call line where people can call to get more information. We also are working on enhancements to our application portal that will allow people to upload documents and evidences that are needed for their application, and to, as I noted, to just improve that scheduling process with one of our community providers who administer ERAP on behalf of the district. So we are, again, resources are available. We know that they're going to continue to be needed, and we're focused on making them accessible to residents, and are grateful to get the word out that the help is here for people who need it. Thank you, and I will turn it back to you, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks so much. And Laura, also important to highlight again that folks can apply more than once, and explain the thinking behind that change.
So we know that oftentimes people will wait because they know they may need help again in the future, and that traditionally ERAP was only available to residents once in a 12-month period. With emergency legislation that is now in place, residents can apply twice. So if you owe rent arrears now, the overall financial cap is going to be the same, whether somebody applies now or applies in 4, 5, 6 months. The cap is the cap. But you can get a partial payment up to the cap now and additional help if you still need it later. So we know that landlords, we want them to maintain their buildings and have the resources that they need to have quality housing conditions, and not building up that debt is great for our tenants as well as important for our landlords to maintain their buildings. So we really want to encourage people who need that help to come get it. We also know that the need is going to be great, and that that if people know they need that assistance now, applying for it now is important, because if we haven't spent down ERAP funds, it's difficult to go ahead and request more funds if we haven't spent the funds appropriated, even though we know the need is out there. So I want to just really encourage people to not wait.
And Laura, that's a great point that you made there at the end about if folks need help, it's really helpful to us to know how much resource we're going to need in order to meet the need by folks coming forward now and doing so. And that change to allow people to apply more than once in a year is there so that you don't feel like that's a hurdle that you have to overcome later. So we'll talk more about that later in the program. Thank you, Laura, for that presentation on ERAP. Next up, to talk more about the housing stabilization programs is Chris Donald. He is the director of the department, the DC Housing Finance Agency, which works hand in hand with DHED to help us invest in affordable housing throughout the district. And so we're going to have Chris Donald present, but before he does, I do want to thank the at-large council member for housing, as the mayor likes to say, Anita Bonds. She can't be with us today because the council has a session at this very moment, but we do want to thank her. She has been a great sounding board for us as we develop these programs, and just couldn't miss the opportunity to thank her for her work and her support of this. And I know Director Donald is in touch with Councilmember Bonds often and is assisted by her regularly. So with that, I want to turn it over to Director Donald.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name again is Christopher Donald, and I'm with the DC Housing Finance Agency. I do want to take a quick second to acknowledge my team and how hard they've been working over the last week or so to get this program stood up. So thank you very much to everyone at the agency. I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing across the pandemic, and then specifically get to our Housing Stabilization Grants program. Many of you may be familiar with the program we have called REMIT, which is the Reverse Mortgage Insurance and Taxes Program for seniors who are having trouble paying those reverse mortgages, that program will step in and provide up to $25,000 to help abate those delinquencies. It's a 0% interest loan. There are income restrictions, so please go to our website where you can find out more about that. That's at www.dchfa.org. The other program that we have is called COVID MAP, and that's a program that is meant to help homeowners in the District of Columbia who are having delinquency on their mortgage as a result of the COVID pandemic. And we'll provide up to 6 months of assistance at a maximum of $5,000 per month for a total of $30,000 in mortgage assistance help. Again, that's going to be a 0% interest loan. We will be looking for that loan to be repaid at the end of that period, but given how many challenges there are economically for the families that we're assisting, we understand that that repayment will likely not happen immediately, and that amount would then be added to the existing mortgage to be paid when available. The final thing that we're focused on here, and Director Donaldson spoke about this, in combination with DHCD, we're working on the housing stabilization grants. And just to give you some context of who we're serving and who we anticipate touching. Between DHCD and DCHFA, we have a combined universe of about 274 properties, which consist of about 30,000 units. All of those units have either 4% tax-exempt bonds and credits or some other form of federal subsidy, which includes CDBG, home monies, or local subsidies coming out of the Housing Production Trust Fund. If your property falls into one of those buckets, then you are absolutely qualified to apply for this subsidy. At this time, we will be funding that need first to preserve the district's portfolio of affordable housing units, and I know that the mayor and the deputy mayor are focused on identifying additional resources to help other multifamily owners across the city. So that's hurdle number one. If you go to our webpage today, again, that's at www.dchfa.org. On the top bar, you will see a button that says COVID Assistance. You can also reach that site as well through the coronavirus DC/rent link as well to get to our site. On that site, you'll see a list of requirements in order to apply for housing stabilization grant. I'm going to run through those a little bit. I won't belabor them here, but if you have additional questions, we're going to have resources for you all to reach out to us and to get more information. That list includes rent rolls from March 2020 until the present. It also includes a rent delinquency report from April 2020 until November of 2020, a completed delinquency template, which will be a download on our site, a basic business license. So it is going to be really important that all of the folks applying for these grants make sure that they're in compliance and good standing with all the DC laws and regulations. We'll be looking for a clean hand certificate, proof of property insurance certificate, property info, meaning the name of the property, the address, number of units, unit mix. Next slide. And then we'll also be looking for the rental income shown on the income taxes. We'll be working with landlords, understanding that those audits are submitted on a rolling basis. So please contact us if there are questions about that. The other really important point that it's really essential that we highlight, and we will need owners' help with this, and we will be verifying ourselves. If you have residents that are already receiving a rental subsidy from another one of the programs that's already been talked about, please flag and identify that now. What we don't want to have happen is for us not to be able to leverage the limited resources we have to touch as many people as possible. So if you could highlight that in your rent rolls so that we know that and we don't have to square that up ourselves, it will expedite the process. Finally, we're going to ask for all of the housing providers to make sure that they certify and attest that all of the information that they're providing us with is accurate and correct. And so if you have questions, you can write to hsg@dchfa.org. Again, that's H as in housing, S as in stabilization, G as in grants, at dchfa.org. We've also established a 1-800 number, which is 1-833-201-9989. Again, that's 1-833-201-9989. You can submit your applications through that email address that I just listed out. And if you have questions about the application process, you can also, again, call 833-201-9989. Next slide, please. The most important thing that we've been working through is how do we keep this process simple and make sure that we can get out assistance to as many residents as possible. We understand that this is an ecosystem, and the health of the residents is also going to be directly impacting the health of the housing providers. At the end of the day, this is critically important because the first thing that's going to happen if we can't get our housing providers stable is that it impacts the condition of the property, right? And therefore, it impacts the homes of those that we're ultimately trying to serve. And at the end of the day, if we don't support these housing providers, over the long term, we won't be able to preserve these units. So this is an important step for us to make sure that we implement and to get those resources out. So in order to do that expeditiously, our process is going to be step number one, review the document submittal that the housing providers upload to our website. Secondly, to evaluate the need that's outlined in that application. Third, to make a determination of need after we've done that analysis. Fourth, to actually execute the grant agreement and those attestations that we just talked about. And finally, we'll make the grant award. We are planning on these grant awards being done on a rolling basis. So the sooner you get your information in, the sooner that we can review your application, and the sooner that we can possibly disperse those grant proceeds. So please, if you've got the information, get it to us as quickly as possible. We want to make sure that this process is as easy and as simple as possible. So if there's questions, again, you can email hsg@dchfa.org, or you can call us on 1-833-201-9989. Director Donaldson went over some of the requirements from a compliance perspective in terms of funding those delinquencies. The agencies will only fund up to 80% of those delinquencies, and the balance of that 20% are incumbent upon the housing provider to pay for. The other thing that happens is when we help reduce or eliminate these delinquencies, we are also expecting that the housing provider will not pursue those residents in the future for those delinquent balances that have been paid off. That's going to be really essential, and we will be monitoring that on an ongoing basis. We want to make sure that our housing providers get taken care of, but we also want to make sure that we put the residents in the position to be stable on a moving forward basis. If you have any questions, you know how to reach us again at hsg@dchfa.org or on 1-833-201-9989. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Director, and really thank you for working with us to stand this up in a really short amount of time, and also working to execute the program as well in a really short window. But we know the relief is needed. We talked about a number of programs today. We talked about CHAP, ERAP, COVID MAP, REMIT, and of course the housing stabilization grants. But what we haven't talked about just yet is the people and how this impacts residents and those housing providers as well. And so Polly's going to bring in a couple of other guests. Reminder, if you do have a question and you're listening on the phone line, you could hit 0 now, or if you are on social media, use the hashtag DCHope, and that'll allow us to see your questions. So Polly, bring you into the conversation.
Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Artie Harris, who is the Vice President of Real Estate at the Montgomery Housing Partnership. And they are particularly involved with one of our major preservation fund developments called Worthington Woods in Ward 8, and really have been a model for how a housing provider can work with tenants who have not been able to pay their rent in order to help them apply for some of our rent assistance programs. And I really want Artie to be able to tell the story of that, and really want to thank MHP for their efforts and their work on preservation. So I've known Artie for 25 years. He's been an affordable housing developer for a lot of good work here in the district and in the region. So Artie, please tell your story. It'd be great to hear.
Thank you, Director Donaldson and Deputy Mayor, for the opportunity to be here today, and happy to be part of this team whose work is responding to residents' needs. We all do that. I'd first like to start with a little bit about MHP and then how we got involved in the district. So at MHP, our mission is to preserve and expand the availability of quality, affordable housing in the region, providing more than 2,000 homes to over 4,000 people. For over 30 years, MHP has been housing people, empowering families, and strengthening neighborhoods. In 2019, we purchased, as Polly mentioned, Worthington Woods, almost a 400-unit property in Ward 8 that was built in 1944. Our mission is consistent with our mission. We propose to keep that property affordable for the long term. And we're so proud that the Worthington Woods Tenants Association has a 15% financial stake in that property. We want the residents to be part of the communities that we buy. We're also very proud that we could not have bought that property without funding from the mayor from her Affordable Housing Preservation Fund. So we also purchased just this past summer another property in DC called Crescent Park Village, a 110-unit property also in Ward 8. So we're making a strong commitment to DC because we think, one, it meets with our mission, and we love providing not just the sticks and bricks, but the community services, the community support programs to help empower the families and strengthen the neighborhood. So at Worthington Woods, our plan, long-term plan is two things. One, the sticks and bricks. The community never had a community space for the residents to gather and to also to have programs. So that's one of our first priorities, to build a community center. Also, the property, even though it's in generally good condition, it needs to have upgrades in the electrical, HVAC systems, modernize the kitchens and baths, and provide all new roofs. So that's another priority. Another big priority is we plan to install solar panels at the property. We'll be one of the largest solar installations in the district, over 2 megawatts of electricity generated, which the primary purpose of it is to reduce the residents' utility bills. And also, who we're partnering with is committed to provide job training, especially for residents in Ward 8, and also some of the residents of our properties will be trained in how to install those panels. Another part which we pride ourselves on is providing support services. And so along with the community center, we'll be able to provide those support services. But even as early as next year, we'll be partnering with the local nonprofit Career Catchers to help our residents provide counseling services for career planning. So while in the near term, those are our priorities, but in the immediate term, our priority is to help the residents get through COVID. And so many of them are struggling because they work in industries that have been hit hard by COVID. They're suffering from either loss of hours of employment or loss of their job entirety. So we created a dedicated resource team, outreach team, to work with the residents to provide assistance and to help them apply for that assistance. The assistance includes programs around utility assistance, food assistance, rent assistance, unemployment, and financial assistance. So we connect them with those agencies, and we also help them with the applications. We also created our own emergency assistance fund that we also provide some funding for the residents. I have to give a big shout out to our property management company that went the extra mile to help the residents sign up for the programs in the city. As Polly talked about, there's the CHAP program and the ERAP program. So it took a team to make this happen. And what we did was, as long as the resident gave us permission to file for them, we did it, because some of them had a hard time because it's hard to get access to them during COVID. It's hard to go door knocking. But if they gave us written permission, we would prepare those applications for them. So while we helped many, there's so many more that need help. Therefore, when we heard of this program yesterday, the Housing Grant Stabilization Program, we were just ecstatic for a number of reasons. One, it's great; those funds are greatly needed right now. And as Christopher and others have talked about, it's easier to apply. The way they set up the new system, it's easier to apply for those, especially during COVID. It's more efficient for the city to administer. And one important thing, it creates resident stability and peace of mind, because it provides for rent forgiveness, and they don't have to worry about the burden of being saddled with all that back rent. So I'd like to end by saying thank you to Mayor Bowser, the Deputy Mayor, Director Donaldson, and their staffs for their leadership in responding to the needs of our neighbors. And now I'd like to introduce one of the residents of Worthington Woods, Ronnie Jameson. Ronnie is the Vice President of the Tenants Association, and he's a very strong leader in the community. And I'd like Ronnie to speak about his experience at the property and all that he and MHP are doing. Ronnie, could you unmute yourself, please, before you talk? Okay? Ronnie, you need to unmute yourself.
Ronnie, you may have to unmute yourself on your phone, not the computer.
There.
Yes.
All right, Ronnie, we got you now.
Thank you so much, Artie. And my experience with HP has been great. It was almost a godsend to the community when MHP decided to purchase Worthington Woods, because everyone was in a cocoon about what was going to happen to our neighborhood. Now our neighborhood has become a real community. They came in and listened to what our needs were, and instead of telling us what they were coming in to do, and we all fell informed with each other. What has happened since as Artie said about the community center, that we were in so much need of here in Ward 8 in this neighborhood, because we had no place to gather for programs, for meetings, and just to become neighbors with each other. But now, before COVID, we had to meet in schools, gymnasiums, churches, houses, laundry rooms, parks, wherever we could, to get to try to come to have some form of communication between each other. But we were excited about MHP coming in and agreeing with a lot of our needs, about the upgrades, the community centers, and we didn't have a tenants association. They actually encouraged us to get our tenant association started and to become fully active in it, and that's what we have done. We have for 2 years we've given turkeys to seniors for the holidays. We've given programs and for the children, and for Christmas we offering raffles of gift certificates so people can assist. That'd be of assistance to someone, some of the people in their maybe utility bills or purchasing gifts or whatever. But for on this side of town, the resources that we had to go have the use of computer systems. Everything is needed to have a bunch of the applications that a lot of the people are terrified about that, because they feeling it's too complicated. They think it needs to be simplified, and they're having problems verifying some of the information that the applications call for. And I'm almost positive that they do qualify for it, but they might not have the ability to get the information. But MHP is doing all they can to try to decrease a bunch of that anxiety that people are having about getting behind in rent or maybe falling behind in rent, and it's creating in some areas a sad family atmosphere. But I'm sure they'll be glad to hear about the new funds, the relief funds coming for the COVID, but they're going to still have instances where they're going to be a little tentative because of not being able to think they will qualify because they might not be able to come up with that information. And MHP, I'm positive, will have a great influence on that situation with the tenants that need it, and for one thing, the relief funds does not necessarily have to go to the tenant if it comes to MHP or to the property management system. That will give a great relief to the tenants that COVID has affected, because it has affected a lot. I live right across from what used to be a great hub of traffic, of people going to and from work, children going to and from school, out to preschool programs, after-school programs, and all of that is gone now. And through libraries being closed, we have one library open on this entire side of town that they could go, if they needed to use a computerized system, they wouldn't be able to, because more than likely there's a backup, or maybe they wouldn't even have the ability to get there to schedule themselves for it. So if MHP can be awarded some of the funds and considerations for relief for the tenants here and Worthington Woods, it will be greatly appreciated. I thank you. My name is Ronnie Jameson.
Ronnie Jameson, thank you so much for that. And I got to ask you, how long have you lived at Worthington Woods?
I've lived at Worthington Woods for 6 years, but I was right in my present residence. I was around the corner, just around the corner, for 20 years. So in it's my entirety, 25 years.
Fantastic. Well, I just wanted to ask that because I think some of what you said really struck me. When you said the word terrified, it really did strike a chord with me, because, we can never, overstate how, the impact of this pandemic has had on people's lives. And to think that people are terrified to apply for a program that can help them, it really shows why we have a different approach on this program with the housing stabilization, so that the housing provider can actually navigate all that the renter would have to navigate previously.
Yes, and that terrified I was speaking of, they're terrified of the or they being rejected from some program because of some minor information that they was not able to get in a timely manner, or something like that, because I'm sure they actually qualify.
All right. Well, Ronnie, I want to bring some more folks into this conversation, so I'm going to actually go to some of the questions that we received. And actually, some of them, I think, speak to what you were referring to. So I'm going to ask Polly and Chris and Laura to help us. But the first question actually came on social media, and it was, if a resident receives LRSP, can they apply for any of the programs today?
I can answer that. No, anyone who's receiving a housing subsidy from the DC Housing Authority, and that includes housing choice vouchers and LRSP, must go to the Housing Authority for recertification of their income, which will reduce their rent and the amount that they owe in addition to what the subsidy pays for. So that's COVID-19 at dchousing.org is the way to access the Housing Authority.
Okay, and Polly, I'm glad you mentioned the Housing Choice Voucher Program because Derek in Northwest had a question whether the Housing Choice Voucher recipients can participate in ERAP, but it seems like you've answered that already. Laura,
Laura could confirm that, I think.
confirm that as well.
Hi, thanks for that question. So we coordinate with the tenant and the housing authority in those instances. We know that if someone's had a change of income, that they can negotiate what their rent is with the housing authority since they already have a subsidy that's based on what they can pay. So yes, we do assist people with their rent arrears who already have affordable housing or an LRSP voucher or other DCHA subsidy, but we do it in collaboration with the housing authority.
Okay. And Wendy asked on Facebook, what about utilities? Excuse me. Is there any relief for that? And there is the LIHEAP program. We'll make sure that on the coronavirus.dc.gov/rent that information is there. I think it's going to be at the bottom of the page. So if you look to coronavirus.dc.gov/rent, that is where you can find more information about the LIHEAP program for utility assistance. And then Delroy in Ward 5 asked how soon the grant funds will be allocated and dispersed, and I think that's probably to the housing stabilization grants. And so, Polly, can you talk about it for the small landlords, and then we'll turn to Chris.
The small landlords, we're accepting applications through December 11th, but we are beginning to process them immediately. The links to the application are directly on coronavirus.dc.gov/rent, and you can click onto the application directly from that site. If I could, I'd like to walk through, Deputy Mayor, some of the requirements. They're very similar to what Director Donald referred to for the affordable housing portfolio. Obviously, you have to be the owner of the unit who applies. There actually is no limit on the rent amount. However, you will only receive a maximum of $2,000, which would be the the portion that the district is going to be able to pay. The forgiveness of the other portion of the rent is also going to be required as well. And you cannot be receiving other forms, or your tenant cannot be receiving other forms of assistance. The same requirements in terms of documentation, a basic business license, your income tax return, that Schedule E that shows the amount of rent income that you declared on your tax. The same true for the district income tax. You need to give evidence that you own the unit and that there is a lease, an active lease for the unit, and have clean hands certification, which is very standard for district grants in that way. Payments will be executed prior to December 31st, and we actually are looking to move that along and, as soon as we start receiving applications and can process them from the small landlords. Remember, small is defined as you own no more than 20 units or less, and that you are leasing them. So it is, that is the definition of small landlord in this case.
Okay. And Polly, just one note, the $2,000 is a $2,000 per month.
Correct, sorry, per month, yes, indeed, thank
Great.
you, yes.
Chris, anything to add onto that?
No, it's really important that folks move as quickly as possible. The sooner you get us your information, the sooner we're able to review, the sooner that we're able to make these grant determinations. So it's in the interest of all of our residents that we do that as quickly as possible.
And Chris, I think you said that before we started that you actually have received some of your first applications, and so
Yes.
really encourage folks to get those in as soon as
Yes,
possible.
absolutely. We've already identified at least $1 million worth of need in the first 12 hours.
12 hours, all right. So another question that we have is from Shaneda, who's a Ward 8 landlord, and asked if rapid rehousing application can be modified to reduce some of the requirements. So if you want to take that, Laura, this is about rapid rehousing application can be modified to reduce some of the requirements. That's as much as I have on the question, but.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure the nature of what I think is important for folks to know is we have extended subsidies for families who are receiving rapid rehousing through the public health emergency. So whereas in the past there is a time limit on assistance through the rapid rehousing program, understanding that people are going to need some more time to rebuild income, we have been able to extend participation in that program. So landlords are receiving full rent for all participants in rapid rehousing. In terms of application for participation in rapid rehousing, if there's something that seems burdensome, we really encourage any landlord to reach out to us at DHS. You can do that. We have our Home for the Holidays event going on right now, so anyone who's interested and has units there would like to rent to people who are exiting homelessness with subsidies, they can do that by our Home for the Holidays at DMPED.gov email address. And you could also put in a question there for us to respond, or you could reach out to us at DHS. You could reach to me directly, Laura.Zeilinger@dc.gov, or to our team at the Department of Human Services. There's some contact information on our website for that as well.
All right. And the next question, just trying to make sure we get through all of them. They're coming in rapidly. For the housing stabilization grants, what if the resident has a balance prior to April 1st? Polly or Chris, you want to talk to that, speak to that?
If residents have a delinquency prior to April 1st, the grant program is not to relieve that delinquency. Residents need to work that delinquency out with the housing service provider.
And they can access actually CHAP and ERAP for that specifically, and to address past arrears. So it is possible to combine for different months. That's why the record keeping is very critical to this on the part of the housing provider, providing those that information in order that we can provide the greatest amount of assistance.
The other reason is the source of these dollars for the housing stabilization grants are federal CARES Act dollars, and you have to show a COVID impact in order to utilize that funding. And so the housing provider would show that their rent rolls have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The next question we had is, I think somewhat similar, but Emily asked if a landlord gets a grant for 80% of the rent from April to November, and they give 20% of that rent, forgive 20% of that rent. What happens if the tenant owes rent for February, March? Is that still owed by the tenant? And I think, Polly, that's a different way to ask the same question. But
It is a different way to ask the same question, but in essence, again, it would need to be looking particularly, I think, to the ERAP program, which does not have a specific COVID relation at this point, would be the best bet in that case in order to clear that arrearage.
Okay. And Artie, let me put you on the spot here. How have you approached kind of residents who maybe have beyond this period? Because I know you said that you'll be applying for the housing stabilization grant. How are you approaching sort of residents who have a rent beyond that period of April 1st or before that period?
Before that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very challenging. So right now, we're just hoping to use this to get what we can, and before that, we'll have to look at, like you said, look at the other programs like ERAP before that, or any other programs that come up, maybe some of our own grant money to help for that period before that. But it's difficult, right? You know, there aren't many programs that have funding earlier than that. So, but we're doing the best, cobbling together whatever programs they are to help subsidize those residents. But this is the largest share since COVID, and so this is a great help. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think what we hope that this does too is helps the housing provider and the renter have a conversation about how they'll address if they have other delinquency, how they'll address that too. Part of the grant agreement that the housing provider will execute will actually make sure that they have a conversation with the residents so that the resident knows that the rent has been forgiven for this period. And so that's something to look out for as well.
Deputy Mayor,
sorry.
actually, that is a requirement of the receiving the funds, that there be a documentation and communication with the tenant in writing regarding the payment of the arrears from April to November.
Thank you. And next question comes from Carlton, who asks what locations I can go to apply for rental assistance in person. That's a good question, but I think right now we're virtual. I think Polly,
Yes.
Laura, Chris, you're all virtual.
We're virtual, and for the CHAP program and the ERAP program, the same network of housing providers are participating, and it is by virtual appointment and by telephone. Let me just give you the telephone for the Department of Housing and Community Development. It's 202-442-7200. For any information on any of our rent assistance programs, please ask for that, and you'll be directed to the point of contact who can point you in the right direction for the right program. So that's 202-442-7200.
And can't emphasize enough that all of the information that we've talked about today will be on coronavirus.dc.gov/rent. So with that, I think we might have exhausted all the questions, or maybe the questions exhausted us. So I'm going to ask to do a round of kind of final thoughts, and we'll actually start off with Ronnie. Ronnie, before I turn to you, when we were talking about how we were going to use this resource that the mayor had identified, we were talking about whether we did it as a resident-based or to the housing providers. And one of the things that you said kind of sounded a lot like what she said, was that if we do it to the housing providers, we can make a whole building whole and then make that community better. And so, Ronnie, I just want to leave you with one of the parting thoughts if you want to share anything else with us.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. I got a lot out of this, and what the greatest thing was hope. And to me, some of the people I come across, or a lot of them I'm going to come across, I will give them some sense of peace for a while, some sense of hope, and for this, if MHP can be granted any funds that they're asking for or need for Worthington Woods, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
You know, I got to say, Ronnie, that over the weekend, I got the great opportunity and honor to meet the Vice President-elect, Kamala Harris, when she went shopping with the mayor at the downtown market. But I got to say that you are a very inspiring Vice President in your own right.
That's great.
All right.
Deputy Mayor, can I just tell you that I just got an update from my staff. We have 5 applications so far for the small landlord program. Really, folks, for anybody who's watching, please spread the word. Let people know. It is really critical that these resources be tapped immediately and that we make the payments in December. So pick up on hope and peace, and let's bring the joys of this season to housing providers and tenants alike. Thank you.
All right, Artie, you've heard us beg and plead for folks to get those applications in. Give us your final thoughts.
Okay, well, I just want to say I'm proud to be here, and I am proud of what the district does, is that you listen to the housing providers, right? And you're very creative in how you come up with programs. So I am delighted to be part of this team, and we're going to get our application in tomorrow.
And Laura, we talked. Ronnie, hold him to that. Hold him to that.
I will.
Laura,
I have his number.
fantastic. And Laura, you want to give us one of your parting thoughts for the team?
Thank you. Well, the fact that Ronnie has hope and seeing his smile definitely gives me hope. We are definitely listening to residents, listening to our housing partners that folks need help with rent right now. And I'm just pleased to be part of an effort that is working to find solutions for our residents, for our tenants, as well as for our housing partners. And just want to echo that there is no reason to wait to get help if you need help. We're here and we will work hard to assist you. So we're in it together.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Chris, these are tough acts to follow, but your parting thought?
I think it's really important just to acknowledge the team that you see in front of you and the fact that everybody in front of you has been working really hard to make sure that we can do as much for the residents of the District of Columbia as is possible, and housing providers are a part of that ecosystem. So we're laser focused on that. The mayor and the deputy mayor have given us our charge to make this happen, and so we're fully committed. So please reach out to us. We're here. We want to help get this solved.
Absolutely. So just want to thank everybody for joining us for this DMPED weekly check-in. We talk a lot about recovery. We talk a lot about the programs, but it was great to hear from some people who are doing the work and also people who benefit from that work today. Next week, we're actually going to turn back to the Bridge Fund, and we're going to actually talk about the program that we have for the restaurants. I know a lot of folks in the room and on the phone have maybe worked in a restaurant before. The reason Mayor Bowser set up the Bridge Fund was to actually make sure that employers can keep their employees and their teams working in the weeks and months ahead. And so we're going to talk more about our approach on how we'll navigate the restaurant program next Tuesday at 4 p.m. So we hope that you'll tune in again next Tuesday. Again, for all the information that we talked about today, coronavirus.dc.gov/rent. Thank you, and as everybody said, and Mayor Bowser says often, we're all in this together, and we'll get through it together. Stay safe, everyone.